All right, thank you all for joining us today. It's time to get started. Since I want to make this webinar as engaging as possible, I'm going to stop at various points and ask for if there are any questions. So at any time, feel free to look down in the bottom of that window and click the Q&A button and add your question in. If I can't get to your question right away, I will also follow up with additional answers at the end, and we'll do a little Q&A session for those that want to be part of that. So for those of you who are joining and don't know me, my name is Josh Sweeney. I am the president and co-founder of FounderScale. Before FounderScale, I built a CRM consulting firm and grew it up to a few $1 million in revenue, which I sold to a CRM service provider. And while building that company, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on sales and marketing solutions and tactics that didn't seem to work for our business. And I find that this is a really common story for many small business owners, that they spent a lot of money in various areas and didn't see the results they were looking for. So my goal today is to share some of that experience, which I'm going to do by focusing on 3 core topics. So the first topic I'm going to share is why lead generation fails in most small businesses. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what demand generation is and how it works. And then last, we're going to go over how demand generation creates more scalable revenue. Let's get started with lead generation. All right, what does this phrase lead generation mean to most business leaders and founders that we work with? Well, when a founder or business leader talks about doing lead generation, what they most commonly mean is that they're going to hire a company, a person, or buy a software tool that's going to go target this group of mythical people who are ready to buy their service right now, if you can just get in front of them right when they're ready to buy. But for those of you like us who have purchased these types of service, and like I did in the past, with this expectation, you probably quickly determined that it didn't work the way that you thought it would, meaning that you ended up paying more for the service than you received back in revenue. In other words, not a lot of financial ROI. But let's dig into this and unpack it with 2 real-world examples that we see a lot of. So the first example is when a founder or business leader talks about, the first example is a sales style lead generation tactic that businesses try, and it's called a meeting setter. Here's the scenario. As a business, you want more scalable revenue, and you believe that the answer is a lead generation service where someone does a number of outbound activities, calls, emails, meetings, messages, to set meetings for you or someone on your team. Now, this often makes sense from a logic perspective, because the thought is, well, if somebody in your target audience is having the business challenge right now that you can solve, then if you can get in front of them at the right time, you can get a lead and maybe close a deal. It also makes sense because your time is valuable. So if someone else can set meetings, you can also maximize your time. So what we see is with this logic, people go off and hire a meeting setting service. The challenge is the most common outcome we see is that people pay thousands of dollars over 3, 6, or 9 months, only get a few meetings that aren't very good, and see no return on investment, meaning that you paid more for the service than you received in revenue. Now, why does this happen? It happens because people buy from people they know and trust. And most of the companies running these campaigns, especially if there's no other larger marketing budget, then they're running it against cold lists of people that have never heard from you or your company. So they just don't respond to this message. Let's look at example 2 that we see in the real world. Example 2 is more of a marketing style example or marketing style lead generation tactic that companies try. It's called pay-per-click advertising. Here's the scenario. Same as before, you need more scalable revenue and believe that the answer is more of a marketing style lead generation, where you're going to run ads on Google and Facebook and other platforms to generate inbound leads for you. And the logic for this is, well, you think to yourself, this is even better than the meeting setting because someone's looking right now. They went and did a search, they saw an ad, and they filled in a form, and boom, you have a lead. But the outcome is much the same as in the past example for the majority of businesses we see. The common outcome is, again, you pay thousands of dollars for 3, 6, or 9 months. Maybe you get a few form fills, but you don't see the return on investment. Again, you end up paying more for the service that you receive back in revenue. Why? Again, people buy from people they know and trust. And in your target audience, most of your target audience are not clicking ads to make a business purchase. They're usually getting referrals from a friend or talking to other business leaders and getting referred into your service. So let me share a few other quick examples here before we move on to the next section. So these are other common examples, and all of these have different use cases from a marketing perspective. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do these. It's more about the expectation. So whether it's search engine optimization, whether it's posting on social, doing any sort of meeting setting, driving inbound, all of these have their place in their use cases. But if your expectation is to deploy one of these tactics and generate leads, thinking of it as the easy button, you're not likely going to get the return on investment that you're looking for. Now, this is usually where somebody in marketing, when I'm out speaking, they say, well, Josh, I know we provide these services. We know PPC works. We know lead generation and meeting setting works. There's all these companies out there doing it. And again, what I want to be clear about is these can work. We just don't see them work very well in small businesses. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that. So what we've seen is that lead generation, these types of tactics, only work in specific conditions, which are not usually prevalent in small businesses. So again, from the outside, we're hearing from the market and other business owners and leaders, you should be doing PPC, you should be doing this, you should just spend more money on these. Maybe you're not spending enough. And what we see is it's a lot more nuanced because there's conditions in those companies that are prevalent and make them work that aren't prevalent in smaller businesses. So that begs the question, when does this work? What are these 2 common scenarios? Number 1 is if you have great name recognition. So name recognition is where your target audience, the person that is your ideal buyer, already knows the name of your company. They see your name and they recognize it. If I say Deloitte, HubSpot, Cisco, any of these, you immediately recognize that name. So well, in fact, that you probably know what industry they're in and a little bit about the services they provide. And what we found is if a prospect recognizes the name of the business, they're much more likely to engage with that business's sales or marketing teams. So for example, if an executive receives an email from Deloitte, they're more likely to respond than if they receive the same exact email from a company that they don't recognize. That's name recognition and how it can have an impact. Now, you may be thinking, well, we're not Deloitte, we're not HubSpot or Cisco. Those are really big names. They have big budgets. But don't get hung up on that because there is opportunity. Your goal is to focus on building name recognition within your target audience and based on the budget that's available to you, which means that you may have to niche down a little bit to deliver on this. Now, your business may only have a target audience of 2,000 or 5,000 people. So that's where you can really niche down and start to build name recognition in your audience. So what you're looking for is that each one of those people that you're selling to or that you want to prospect into knows and recognize your name. So for lead generation tactics to work well, you need name recognition. Scenario number 2. Lead generation can also work well if you have an engaged audience. So an engaged audience is a list of hundreds or thousands of people that have consistently engaged with your brand. They've been to your website, they're on your newsletter, they've attended a webinar, they've engaged in multiple other ways with your brand, all generally because your marketing team has done a fantastic job staying in front of your ideal customer, usually over months or years. Because when you have an engaged audience, you can then do outreach and execute lead generation campaigns. And that campaign is much more likely to work and provide a financial return on investment. So for lead generation to work well, you also need an engaged audience. All right. So if you don't have name recognition and you don't have an engaged audience, lead generation probably is not going to work very well for your business. You're not going to see the ROI and the expectation that you're going to purchase a service and see leads within the next 90 days and sometimes even 6 months. So what are you going to do? But before we get into that, I want to open it up for any questions now that we've gone through some of the lead generation section. So if you have a question, go ahead and put that in the Q&A. I'll give you about a minute there. All right, it looks like that's clear. Nobody has any questions? Awesome. All right, so we've gone through the lead generation portion of why lead generation usually doesn't work in a small business environment. You need that engaged audience, you need name recognition so that when you do outreach, they already recognize you. But if you don't have that, if you don't have lead recognition or an engaged audience, what are you going to do? Demand generation is the process of consistently engaging your target audience so that when they have a challenge, they think of you and your company. And demand generation helps you build that name recognition and helps you create an engaged audience that you can now go out and work on selling into. Now, before starting any demand generation program, the first thing you need to know is the goal of demand generation. The goal of demand generation is first to engage and educate. So it's a fundamentally different, whereas the goal of lead generation is to convert and close. And what normally happens in small businesses that we work with and that we talk to, out in the entrepreneur ecosystem is everybody wants to jump down here. They want to jump down to lead generation and immediately convert people that have never even heard of their company. And there's very few ways that we've actually ever seen that work. And it's usually not very consistent. So again, it doesn't create a scalable situation for revenue. So with demand generation, your goal is to connect with your target audience on a human level and help educate them. That way, when they have a challenge that your business solves, they think of you first because you've educated and engaged that audience. Now, as you can see, I'm in front of you today with this webinar. We found a lot of challenges in working with entrepreneurs and founder-led companies where many of them were jumping down here and having a certain expectation, and they were going through firms, vendor after vendor, trying this. And we said, how can we help the market? Well, part of our engage and educate is, what is the difference between lead generation and demand generation? And why does lead generation not work for most business owners or small business owners? So as you can see, I'm in front of you with this webinar. My goal is to connect with you, the audience, engage and educate you on demand generation. If I do this well, hopefully I become known as the expert on demand generation. And when you have a revenue challenge or hear of somebody having a revenue challenge, then you think of me and maybe you provide a referral. So this is just one part of the Founder Scale demand generation program that we're doing. And you'll see this evolve because I want to give you real world examples of how this works and what the impact can be. But this one webinar that you're on today is not enough. That's just one engagement. It's one part of the formula for success, which we call the demand generation formula. The demand generation formula is value plus frequency over time. Let's start at the top with value. The first thing you need to determine is how you can provide value to your target audience with the goal of engaging and educating them. You want to give before you ask, give before you receive. So let me give you an example while comparing lead generation and demand generation. If this was lead generation, if I was doing lead generation and I was using the meeting setting service that I mentioned earlier, where I'm just connecting and asking people for a meeting on LinkedIn, I would go out and build a list of our target audience. And then I would connect on LinkedIn and immediately follow up trying to get a meeting. Now, I'm sure that all of you have had this happen before, right? You hit the connect. Yeah, I accept the connection. All of a sudden it just pops up automatically. The thing is this provides zero value to you and provides zero value to your prospect. So we're getting really good at ignoring anything that doesn't provide value to us. And that quick pop-up provides no value to them versus a demand generation effort, which is going to be fundamentally different. So in demand generation, in addition to a webinar like you're on today, where it's more about engaging and educating, we also like to host events. So another engagement, if you're local to Atlanta or if I'm out traveling, we're going to invite you to a dinner where we have 12 spots available with an amazing speaker. We're going to bring in a speaker. There's going to be other founders and other business leaders in your area. In your case, it may be other people with similar titles to those in your target audience. And for those who attend, you get to learn, you get to break bread with others and network where you can build other relationships. It has value and provides value to you, in this case, if you're coming to our dinner, or to your prospects if you're hosting one of these. Now, my question here is, which one do you want to be a part of? And which one do you want to deliver to your clients or prospects? Do you want to be known for the one sending the cold LinkedIn message, immediately following up, asking for a meeting with somebody that you've never met that came off a list? Or do you want to be known for the one who invited them to dinner to break bread and provided value first for those prospects? And just think about, from a value perspective, what the perception of your company is when you do one or the other thing. So demand generation is fundamentally different. Again, that our goal is to engage and educate, not try to convert immediately. So now that we understand value, just some real world examples of how we can provide value, let's go to the next part of the equation, which is frequency. Let me give you a scenario. You're at a networking event and you get introduced to someone who has a service that is that you're interested in. Like, you're like, hey, sounds like a great service. I'm really interested in what you're providing, but you don't need it at that moment. Then about 3 months later, something changes in your business. And all of a sudden you're like, I need that service. I talked to that person. I don't know when it was. I talked to him. I need that service. And for the life of you, you can't remember who it was. You may even search your email and you still don't figure out who it was. So what do? You go find that service somewhere else. Frequency solves this challenge. Demand generation uses frequency to stay in front of your target audience, because the goal of demand generation program is not only to engage and educate, but to stay in front of each person in your target audience, usually in our preferences with at least one engagement per month, so that they don't forget about you and they choose to buy from you when they have a need. Now, earlier I shared that this webinar was part of a demand generation program, our demand generation program. I also layered in the dinner example. With those two offers, I've now have this quarterly engagement. So you see down here is our quarterly rhythm. And so we build out quarterly rhythms for a demand generation program. Now, the frequency and rhythm that you see here of the monthly and quarterly and the volume of this all depends on budget, size audience, a lot of other factors. But now I've done a webinar and there's an educational dinner invite, and I have these two quarterly touch points. At some point, I'm also going to see if you want to join a niche monthly newsletter. Now, what I mean by niche monthly newsletter is this is a newsletter. Ours is called Scaling B2B, and it provides nothing but educational material on demand generation. We're not trying to sell you. We're not pitching you products. It's all value that you get without any solicitation. So it's not about us. It's about you. And that's really part of the demand generation philosophy we have at FounderScale is it's about our prospect. It's not about what we want. So we have to provide value to ensure that that newsletter works well for us and works well for our prospects. So with this newsletter, we would also be in front of you monthly while also offering quarterly engagements. Now, as you can see, I've mixed in personal engagements and digital options and provided multiple ways to engage and educate. Why? Because you never know how a prospect will engage. If I'm local, I'm in Atlanta. So if I'm local to Atlanta, it's a little easier to have dinner and have dinners in Atlanta, invite those people. But I will maybe need to travel to have dinners in another place. I also want digital engagements in between those times that we're doing any sort of on-demand or in-person events that we also host. All again, because we don't know how that prospect and you don't know how prospects want to engage. So you have to make multiple offerings. And it also changes on a quarterly basis. You know, somebody may be really busy this month or this quarter, but they have a little more flexibility because of the holidays. So they're more than willing to go to something that's a little more social, and they expect more social engagements in December. So they're going to show up to that where they may have not responded in the past. All right, back to the formula. The last part of the formula, the demand generation formula, is time. So as I mentioned, the formula is over time. Now, this is perhaps one of the hardest parts of the demand generation formula, especially for fast-paced leaders, because the first question, especially if somebody's doing lead generation, the alternative is, when am I going to see my first lead, right? How much do I have to pay to get there? I want it now. I want the easy button. I'm going to delegate it out to you, and you're going to make those leads happen. Well, the challenge is that after you've tried all of those, you really start to look at why demand generation has a significantly more value as a small business owner and leader. So with demand generation, you provide value frequently over time so that when your target audience has a challenge, they think of you first. Now, let's change the previous story I shared just a bit. So you go out and you speak with someone about a service for your business, and a service sounds great, but at the moment you don't have a need. And they actually follow up this time. So they follow up 1 month later, and then maybe 3 months later, but then they stop. Well, 12 months from the initial interaction with them, you just close a big deal and you're like, oh, I need this service. I remember what it was. It's a little vague. And again, you can't remember who it was. You go search through your email, and it's really hard. I don't know about you, but it's hard to find emails when you don't know what to search for sometimes, what that keyword was that brings it up. And so you don't figure out who it was, and you go find that service elsewhere. Well, this flow and that scenario that I just shared is how B2B purchasing really works. Most people don't have a need right at the moment. You have to stay in front of them and provide value frequently over time. And over time, you know, the essence of marketing is actually in perpetuity, right? You're staying in front of them in perpetuity so that when they do have that need could be 3 months from now, it could be 24 months from now as the business changes, or as they change jobs, they may go somewhere else and remember you because of that. So there's all kinds of scenarios that go into how people really buy and purchase services and choose vendors and products from in other B2B situations. And you just never know when their business is going to change. So don't forget this formula: value plus frequency over time. Before we get into the last area, which is scalability, please let me know if you have any questions. So I'm going to give you just a moment to pop in, and you can go hit that Q&A button and put any questions you have on anything that we've shared so far. All right, so one of the questions is, we have clients all over the US. How do we do something like a dinner? I think the most common way is, one, we like to have reps. Like, we are big advocates of having a rep in the location that you want to sell to, because it just makes these dinners easier, and you can really cover an area to engage and educate more often. So, if you're in Atlanta and all of your reps are in Atlanta, then you can compound on all of these engagements and mix and match digital and in-person very easily. If you're across the US, what we see is a founder or leader will travel to another area and say, hey, I'm coming into town. And maybe they have that territory. Now, they could live in that territory, they may not, but they have this territory, and you've been running a demand generation campaign to build up awareness, like name recognition and engagements and that engaged audience. And so then you can travel and you can host that dinner. And this is very common as you go up to larger companies. You see a lot more dinner engagements because, you know, if you have a CEO of a 200 or billion, 200 million or $500 million company, it's not likely they're going to respond to as many of the digital engagements. But if you can put other people in the room that are just like them, they will show up to a dinner, you know, at a nice steakhouse and things like that. So you can travel around to host those dinners. And what you need to do is that you've been working on the building that engaged audience in that area and that name recognition before you invite them to dinner. So there is some building process to stay in front of them before you make that travel arrangement. All right. The other question is a copy of the video. Yeah. So this video will be produced. It'll go on our website and an email will go out to everybody that attended with a link to this video. All right. So let's cover scalability. Again, if you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A box and I will get to them as we pause. All right. So when you use the demand generation formula to put together the demand generation program, which is the overarching program that we look at, you're now engaging and educating in a one-to-many format. So for example, if you're going to this dinner, one-to-many, and depending on budget and other factors, as you see from the program here on the slide, you know, at the beginning of the year, maybe in January when you started this, you've engaged 0 people. Right? Maybe you've engaged 10, whatever it might be from your email, whatever number you can get. But after this progression, you've actually engaged 3,775 at the end of 12 months. So you started building up an engaged audience that now is going to respond more often to any other types of interactions that you have, maybe even a lead generation activity to set a meeting. But without this engaged audience, again, that lead generation portion isn't going to work. So what we look at is how many people are engaging, and that means they're engaging back with our brand or your brand in this case, and with your reps and your marketing team. And the thing is from a scalability perspective, this compounds every year. This keeps growing. There's some natural churn, but the number keeps going as you do the demand generation program. And these are ongoing interactions. The great thing is these are real people engaging with you and your team. And that carries a lot of weight as compared to just cold email outreach to set a meeting with somebody you don't know. So they're real engagements that you can get ROI from over the long term. Now, from a scalability perspective, it's also fundamentally different in that it's more scalable because you're building a network of people who associate with you and your solution and associate your company with a business challenge. So for example, I'll use us as an example because it's the easiest, but if somebody associates and hears lead generation and then a business owner is struggling and says, hey, you need to go talk to Founder Scale about demand generation and understand why lead generation is not working in your small business, we get associated with that. And we start to build a network of people. Another example is the other side of our house we do demand generation in HubSpot. And for HubSpot, I was at a networking or at an event in EO, the entrepreneur organization in New York. And the person from New York that I had met only once was in Atlanta for the weekend. And a bunch of people got together. And as I'm talking, it's like 30 seconds into just meeting this lady and talking, she said, oh, you're the HubSpot guy. Like, yes, that's what I'm going for. That is engaging and educating. They have recognized you and your name and know what you do. And that's more scalable because then when somebody asks, they're going to pass that referral on to you. So you have this army of people who associate you with a solution and you've engaged them enough to where it really stuck. And I think that's the key point here is, did you engage them enough to where that name, your brand stuck with them and they can pass that along? So the other great thing from a scalability perspective is demand generation does generate leads. It will generate inbound lead flow as you have these engagements. We hosted a dinner with a client or helped a client host a dinner. They got leads from that dinner. That was actually their first dinner that they did with us. And so for their prospects. And so you do get leads from this, but it's not the direct goal, which actually makes it more effective. You will get customers from demand generation, but you also get referrals. You'll build up more content that's reusable. For example, this will go out to many people, even those who didn't attend. It'll be hosted on our website. You get SEO impact from the content that you generate. And then you also get that name recognition and engaged audience that we talked about earlier. So I know we're coming up on time, so I will wrap up. From here, the recap, couple things to remember, and then we'll drop to any questions that you have. So if you don't have name recognition with your target audience and you don't have an engaged audience, then lead generation is probably not going to be the best goal for you. And the expectation that you're going to buy a service and get leads within the next 3 to 6 months and actually get ROI is probably not a healthy expectation. So you really need name recognition and an engaged audience for lead generation tactics to work. Again, the goal of demand generation is to engage and educate. And then you do that, you engage and educate using the demand generation formula, value plus frequency over time. And in closing, before getting to the Q&A, I want to leave you with this. Nobody remembers the name of the last person that sent them a cold email to set a meeting. People remember your name when you help them learn. People remember your name when you invite them to a dinner to meet with others. And people remember your name when you engage them on a human level. And that is the company that they choose to buy from. Thank you for joining. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put those into the chat. If you have any other questions that you think about after this or want to reach out, my name and information is right here. Also, if you want to join the understand more about demand generation and get that niche newsletter, you can go to founderscale.com/scalingb2b, register for that newsletter. And again, it's all educational information that we're sharing on demand generation and how it helps small businesses and founder-led companies. So I'm available for any Q&A, and we'll hang on for about the next 5 minutes in case anything comes to mind for you. Thank you for joining. All right, it looks like all the information was pretty clear. So again, if you have any questions, reach out via email. We're happy to help. And we'll get to those questions, get back to you with any answers and the answers that we have. Thank you for joining.